Welcome back. We are coming to you live from the National Results Operations Center in Midrand, Johannesburg. Just looking at the updates since we last spoke and connected with you here on Salam Media. In fact, 81.5% of voting districts have been completed. That leaves the ANC in the lead with 41.3%, the DA at 22.16%, and the MK party at 13%. Of course, moving on now, we do continue with the conversations that we've been having all day long. Lots of interesting people and interesting aspects, perspectives that we've been hearing throughout the day and throughout our coverage here at the Results Center. Joining me is, of course, Mr. Inayat Wadi from AM4C and Sister Fairuz Najia from Al Jama. Assalamu alaikum to you both. Shukran for joining us.
Walaikum salam, shukran for having us.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, Zaid, it's actually feels quite strange sitting on the other side. Normally, I would be sitting in the hot seat, but you had the honor.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm very nervous about this interview, if I'm being honest, because there are big shoes to be filled here. But this time around, Night, as you've correctly stated, you are on the other side of on the other end of all of this this time, and you're the one being interviewed as a political party. I think that the discussion here tonight, what we really want to unpack here, is the Muslim vote. It's something that was gaining prominence and traction in the media in the past few months, especially when the Palestinian issue came to prominence. I think, Fairuz, we'll start with you. When it comes to the Muslim vote, do you believe and do you understand that there is such a thing as a Muslim vote to begin with?
Mhm. Yeah, you look, our constituency, and I think it also, if one could reflect where Al Jama started as a party, we really focus on the Muslim community constituencies. Our premise is that we advocate for the Sunnah and the Quran to permeate through all facets of our lives. We do it the way that Al Jama has approached it is to do it in a way that our Islamic tenants will not be subjugated to any kind of secular or other laws or civil laws, but we do it in a way where our rights can still be elevated and realized, and where we can practice our deen probably more freely than any other place in the world, alhamdulillah. So we'd like to vanguard that, and we'd also like not to see any corruption of, what the tenants are. We find, and one example that we can clearly relate to is that of customary law, indigenous law in South Africa. Where African indigenous law were, they reduced it to writing and crystallized forms thereof. And that was entirely atrocious. It was one of the worst things that could have been done because the product was a law that the indigenous people could not identify with. It did not allow the kind of flow and growth of those particular laws as it should be. I mean, Sharia in itself, it's a well-trodden path to water, right? But its interpretations are based on the four sources of our laws, right? Being our interpretation being one of that, which allows the growth of our understanding. That's why Islam will always be applicable, no matter whether you're in the beginning times or the end times, right? So what we see when you reduce tenets like that to writing, as we see with African customary law, you sit with a crystallized version that is, number one, twisted. It does not really speak to the real essence because of the language issues. And, Arabic itself is very complex. We are still developing our understandings of that. So Al Jama's perspective is that that should not be touched. You should not try to crystallize within a framework of secular law. So as a Muslim party, we find that that is very important a stance to take within our human rights and constitutional framework. And I think that's the role we play in our era.
Uncle Noyed, I think before we really get very deep into this, I think just relate, if you could relate some of your experiences over the past few days and perhaps the past few months as well on the campaign trail, what it's been like, moving from the media space over into politics, which is a whole other game.
Well, Zaid, obviously, it has been a major shift being on the other side of the coin and the other side of the spectrum and having covered many elections in the last 20 odd years, both local and national elections. And it's actually put me in a very, very good space to actually understand what this political landscape is all about. And obviously, we've seen a lot of change in the last 20 odd years, since democracy, in fact, the last 30 years, we've seen just so much actually play out in the political space. And when one looks at South Africa, we're still a very, very young democracy. We're a fairly young democracy. But again, when one looks at how this democracy has evolved over a period of time, when one looks at the challenges through all the stages and the various elections that we've held, and we've come now to a stage where we knew that this was going to be a critical election. It was going to be a crucial election. It was going to be a watershed moment for the country. And when I look at this campaign and through my involvement with the Allied Movement for Change, obviously we look at the principles and some of the issues that Feroz has actually touched on. We are a secular democracy, but it doesn't mean you need to compromise your principles from an Islamic perspective. And this is the reason why Allied Movement for Change, we built the party on the foundations and the pillars of strong Islamic ethos and values. Although we did not push ourselves as a Muslim party, and I attended one of the events in Erasmia where we spoke about the lucrative Muslim vote. And I raised the question there as well in terms of is the Muslim vote the only lucrative vote, or is every vote in this country a lucrative vote? And based on these principles, based on these values, we found that there is generally a degeneration from a moral perspective in this country, and I've seen it. And for me, that has been a major area of focus. Clearly, when one looks at the Muslim community in particular, to a large extent, we've seen the campaign being fought on one issue, which is Palestine.
Mm.
And I mentioned Palestine is not the only issue. There are just so many issues. And when one looks at it from a perspective in terms of the degeneration of this country, in terms of service delivery, in terms of corruption, in terms of joblessness, in terms of just so much happening in this country in a short space of time. And all of this was being done without anyone being held accountable. And generally, we find that the public just accepted the status quo. All you heard was complaints. Yes, we've run down. We've got this problem. We've got electricity problems. We've got this problem. The economy is down. Joblessness. 70% of the youth unemployed. Employment in general, 40% down as well. So all these things, but again, it was without accountability. And this is where we saw the space as the Allied Movement for Change. Look at smaller parties, new parties, but again, to hold those in power accountable. And it's a very, in fact, when I look at the statement that I've made repeatedly, we are not only here to speak truth to power, we are here to implement the truth.
Mm. I mean, when a question for both of you then is, when we look at Muslims in South Africa, we've got a long, rich history in this country. But when we face the fact that we find that Muslims only make up about 2 to 3% of the population in this country. So I think, starting with you, Uncle Inayat, when you look at a Muslim vote, if you do believe there is such a thing as a Muslim vote, what does that look like to you? And then, of course, after you, we can move on to various.
Okay, I think we make up about 2%, as you mentioned. I think the Muslim vote is about 1.5% of this country, and that is if all Muslims vote. We've looked at statistics, and the stats tell us that close to about 800,000 Muslims were registered to vote. If you look at the 2019 election, close to about 250,000 Muslims only voted. Now, that alone indicates to us that our involvement in politics is on the decline. Since the advent of democracy, since 1994, we had many Muslims in politics, and over the years, we've seen politics starting to actually die off, and people became less and less interested. Yet, during this period of time, there have been many issues that have impacted on us. And apart from just the day-to-day issues that we speak about in terms of how it affects us personally in terms of leading our daily lives, when we're talking about legislation, we know over the years and throughout my involvement in the media as well, we've dealt with a number of these issues. We're talking about legislation, the whole questions around the Muslim personal law, the Muslim marriages bill has become an issue. In 2008, the Civil Union Bill was introduced, was passed, legalizing same-gender marriages. We've seen abortion. In recent times, we spoke about the Bella Bill. We know the Bella Bill, and also many other issues, like, for example, the education system. The whole question surrounding same-sex attractions within our education systems, and all of this puts Muslims in a very, very awkward situation. And the point I had made earlier in terms of raising these issues, accountability, and this is important because if you don't have representation within government, if you don't have representation to challenge some of this legislation that is being passed, then we are on a hiding uh, and also if you look at some of the other issues from a global perspective, you're looking at foreign policy. We look at the performance of our leader at Allied Movement for Change, Mansour Sheikh Imam, raising the issue about the visa for the Palestinian issue. Palestine was a major talking point, but this was a man who raised this issue in Parliament. As activists, from outside we can make a lot of noises, but from within, asking the right questions, speaking to the right people. That was just one of the examples. There are many, many other examples, and there are many issues that are going to impact on Muslims in general and also in terms of future generations. And this is the reason why we're saying that we need to be involved. We know it's a secular democracy. We know that even the constitution of the country, although it remains supreme, in this country, but again, we've got our Sharia law, which obviously which we will never ever compromise, and also at the same time make sure that certain boundaries or certain red lines are not crossed, and all of this in an effort to protect what we strongly believe in and what we strongly hold on to.
Sister Feiruz, I mean, you did touch on this earlier on. You did speak about what kind of representation a Muslim party will offer the electorate. But then just coming back to that question of who exactly is this Muslim electorate, if it exists out there?
Yeah, if we just look at how voting had taken place, and we can go into our Islamic communities and we look at the trends that we see along the voting lines, we can see how very diverse our Muslims are, and the commitment to issues which we may feel is a no-brainer for Muslims might be something totally different to what we anticipate, right? But I just want to speak about the premise as a Muslim and what the injunctions state. Firstly, the one of the cardinal rules is that we enjoin what is good and we avoid what is harmful. In research you have the rule of first do no harm, and that basically stems from that. In public policy you have a very similar thing. So in Islam we have very clear guidelines about what is harmful, and what is beneficial. So as public servants and as Al Jama'ah, the springboard for us is that how do you ensure that what we are going to promote in terms of our policies is going to maximize good, public good. The Quran and the Sunnah is a perfect example of that. We've got such a structured and beautiful, clear set of guidelines for us. It's not just for Muslims, though. It's for all of humankind. And when we talk about equality, one of our major issues we have in here is the inequalities across South Africa. Racism, rampant racism. The last sermon of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke against racism and superiority of one man over the next on the basis of race or any kind of nationality or creed. So those are particularly relevant for us here in South Africa. We look at issues along honoring our women, gender-based violence being such a pressing issue across our country. So as Muslims, we have these universal values that we espouse. Al Jama'ahs actually had great appeal to various other faiths because of propagating that. I think as Muslims so insular. We've been very insular about what our deen says and how beneficial it is to all of humanity. It's not just our preserve, it's the preserve of all our communities. So our position is we take that out. We'll bring it to you, we'll demonstrate firstly. It's not just a matter of going there and telling you the Quran says this, the Quran says that. It's demonstrating in practice and speaking with convictions along the lines of what we've been ordered to do as Muslims. And that's been key. I mean, I find in communities that we go into, the resonance lies in that. So I think as Muslims, we hold such promise. Our Quran holds keys to so many of our issues. We can solve them if we start applying them. I think we should stop being reticent around that and apologetic So, which is also why Al Jamaa is not just with the issue of identity being identified as a Muslim party for all of humanity has been quite important for us.
But do you think you've been able to capture that, the imagination of Muslim voters out there? You are representing Al Jamaa, and Al Jamaa has been around for a while. Have you been able to capture that Muslim vote?
But the trends are, if you look at the scoring board, the numbers as they tally now, the votes across the board, if you compare that to previous years, we see a phenomenal increase according to our previous results. That tells us we're doing something right, alhamdulillah. And whatever we're doing right, we should keep doing. So I think there has been a capture. I mean, we are on more than 30,000 currently, 31,000 and odd nationally. Provincially in the Western Cape doing particularly well as well. So Alhamdulillah, I think that because of everything I've been speaking about now, it resonates to them. As Muslims, it's irrefutable. You can't refute what the Quran says. You can't refute what the Sunnah says. That's our strongest tools and that we have as Muslims. So I think we should start being less apologetic and more sharing and open with the gifts that we have.
Uncle Inayat, I mean, Al Jamaa has been around for a while, and of course, let's try to avoid groupthink in this conversation and this discussion that we're having here. The question then is, as AM4C, then, if you are trying to capture the imagination of people who are, trying to resonate with Muslim values and Muslim ideals, what's the need then for a new party? And I'm sure you've had this question posed to you a number of times. I mean, people might wonder, well, aren't you splitting the vote with a new party then? Could you not work with existing and established parties that speak to the same values?
Well, I think, Zaid, it's not about splitting the party. In fact, prior to the party being registered, there were talks being held with all other players, and unfortunately, in fact, the idea behind it was to obviously unite Al Jamaa together with parties like M40 and also I think the Sun Party as well. So that was the initial intention, but for reasons obviously this didn't materialize. And
Could you
AM4,
perhaps maybe go into those reasons if possible?
well, I was not part and parcel of this, and I don't want to be misquoted for anything that may have been said or not have been said. So I would rather steer clear from there. But the key issue here is it's not about splitting the vote. In fact, this is the reason why we haven't positioned ourselves as a Muslim party. We looked at a party that has certain common values and principles that resonate with other people as well. And we know that there are many that would subscribe to common values and common systems. Okay, so this was not only about splitting the Muslim vote. The key issue that one needs to understand is when one looks at the psyche of the Muslim mind and the Muslim culture. And this is something that I've learned very, very fast in the last month as being part and parcel of this campaign. We have got a lot of work ahead of us, okay, in terms of social re engineering. We've seen this decline in interest in the politics of this country over a long period of time. And I'm sure Pharaoh will concur with this as well, where we find that Muslims are somewhat all over the show in the political landscape. You know, we've sadly, I must admit that you have this class system, obviously, where you have those that seek benefit from a political party. So if you do approach a group of business people, what is it in for me? I mean, those are questions that are being asked, and this is the nature of the beast. This is the country that we speak to, and we're talking about. You know, we know about entrepreneurs, we've got a history, all of that, and let us not forget that this could possibly, this has obviously is an issue with us as well within the Muslim community. You know, we speak about black monopoly capital, we speak about white monopoly capital. There's a thing called Muslim monopoly capital as well in this country. Okay, so that is a one issue. On the other hand, we have got disunity within the Muslim community, within the scholarly fraternity. There is a problem. There are those scholars that will tell you don't vote. There are those scholars that will tell you to, you need to vote. And I'll give you a personal experience on election day. Somebody walked past me and he told me, he says, Inayat, I sat in Federal Salah and I made dua for you. But remember, I don't vote.
I think that's something I've also noticed where you'll get a bunch of people who will be very eager to tell you, vote for this party, don't vote for that party. Mahmoud, are you registered to vote? No, no answer. But Sister Feiruz, just your thoughts on that, what Brother Nayat was also speaking about
Yeah.
concerning the Muslim identity and unity versus disunity in the community.
Yeah, look, let me just start broadly by looking at the different parties and even um, the the M4C. If you look at Sun and you look at Al Jama as well, um, I want to look at the maturity of our democracy that we have thus far. And if you look at the content of the debates, even though the parties are differing, there's a level at which they are differing. It's no longer, for the most part, at least the ones I've participated in, there's not those cheap politicking where you try to defame the next party without any substance to it necessarily, right? So I'd like to think that's a maturity of our political realm. On a societal level, I think that people have also similarly matured to that extent. But I think we need to go a bit further than that because the real maturity is able to deal with diversity. There was a slogan, unity, united in diversity. And for us, the various Sahaba, they also had differing views. We have different madhaib that started to develop over time where the student had different views to the teacher, etc. Right? That wasn't frowned upon. It was just looking at particular context, but it also teaches us that there can be difference, but you can still feel a brotherhood within that. And I think that is the maturity of a democracy that we are yet to see. And there's no reason for us to be, for there to be a certain level of acrimony and not unity as opposed to unity. And I think the parties can actually play a very important role in promoting that kind of unity that we see in various levels of our society. Looking at the Eid issue, for example, we know that it's been the domain of the ulama. What can the parties do to kind of get some perspective in on that for the benefit of society at large? So you demonstrate that kind of unity despite your diversity to come to some common ground, and how do you teach society that that is possible? So I don't think that we should be stagnated in any kind of paradigm that, oh yes, we are disunited and will remain that way. I think we can definitely, springboarding from this point, we've heard that this is a watershed election. This can be a watershed moment for society on various levels because of the different kinds of leadership we have in place now. So inshallah, I think there is hope that we will address that issue of unity amongst Muslims, and it has been a problem that has been plaguing us for very long. I think we need to understand that if we find people disagreeing with us, we do not need to get heated and emotional and feel so a need to disparage the next party that we don't even want to associate with those parties anymore. So, like I'm saying, it happens on this level, it happens on various levels of our society. If we can demonstrate that as political parties, we can demonstrate that it is possible throughout.
Yeah, I mean to shift from this, the topic of unity within the Muslim community itself. We are entering a period of quite a bit of uncertainty, especially with the likelihood of coalitions being formed in a number of provinces, and almost definitely on a national level as well, as we see the ruling party has been in decline. Earlier on, I was speaking to the ACDP, sorry, the African Christian Democratic Party. And this question for both of you is, in the event of coalition politics, it is tremendously more likely for smaller parties, or what would be considered smaller parties by many, but still do represent a mandate, um, to play a role in keeping these coalitions together. And I think Al Jama is testament to that in the city of Johannesburg, for example, where you've brought two parties together and holding the reins as mayor there in that city. How open are you to working not just with other parties in general, but parties who are faith based? There may be certain issues that you disagree with, and I think if I'm thinking between AM4C, Al Jama, and ACDP, the Palestine-Israel issue is really one of the biggest issues that could be disagreed upon there. But simply based on the merit of being faith-based parties, would you be willing to work with them? Fairuz, and then
Yeah, look, I think the issue of coalitions, yeah, certainly has to come up because we see a trend even globally where we have this instead of a unilateralism or bipolarity, we have multiple amount of actors coming together and to make that they form various coalitions. So we see it working overseas, and very possibly we may need to consider seriously how we look at that here. Um, you know, wherever you have values that are you have a common ground, and you've mentioned faith-based parties, that certainly provides a fertile ground for workable coalitions. It would also depend on what the numbers dictate to us, because if you just look at the numbers right now, it can go either way. It could go a way where we try to work to maintain a position that, look, if we do not make a stand and form coalitions, we might see something totally different in our international stance, for example, being pro-Palestine. So if we don't stand and form some kind of cooperative arrangement, whatever that arrangement is, with other parties, how do we maximize our position in terms of our policy stances and our mandates that we were given from our electorate? And I think that's what politicians need to take seriously. Um, we know that there's been talks about secession by certain parties. If they do come into power, we know that the DA was very strongly promoting that because they really want to see a kind of Western Cape independent by itself. So one needs to look at, is that the best for the Western Cape, and what do the other parties do? Do you just simply fall in line, or how do you create a framework where you can say, actually, no, we oppose this? Do we form coalitions, or do we vote along same lines with other parties? So there are various ways within a democracy to achieve that kind of unitary front, united front.
And Sister Fairuz, the reason why I posed that question first to you was because earlier on I was speaking to the deputy leader of the ACDP, and they did say, well, we are willing to work with anyone as long as it's not the ANC. I asked specifically, would you be willing to work with Al Jamal, for example, as a Muslim party? They said, why not? And hence that's why I brought that question there. Uncle Inayat, AM Fusi, working with parties like ACDP.
I think we've finally reached this political landscape where we are now seriously talking about coalitions. And we all knew at some point in time this was going to happen. In the build up to the elections, a lot was spoken about the moonshot pact, the DA and all the other associated parties on the one hand, and obviously look at the parties to the left. And here we're talking about the ruling parties, the ANC, the EFF, and if it is just a question of Palestine, you know, and if that is motivation enough to go into a coalition that supports Palestine, my question is, why don't you support the EFF? Because the EFF have actually been a lot more vocal than the ANC on the question of Palestine. Some of their statements have been more hard hitting than what has come through from the African National
Sorry,
Congress.
are you saying there, just for the record, you would prefer working with the EFF
No,
over
no,
the
no.
ANC?
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm just using this as an example. Okay. Again, the whole question surrounding coalitions is again how well or how badly would the ruling party to be? Because the most likely partner in the coalition would be the African National Congress. And we've spoken about this as the Allied Movement for Change. Now, initially, the figures, we thought that if the ANC gets to around the 46-47% mark, it would be easier for them to actually go into a coalition with a small party with a small percentage. But now, to all intents and purposes, after 85% of the votes that have been counted, 42%, are there going to be enough parties, firstly, for the ANC to go into coalition with? In fact, those dynamics has actually changed in the last 2 days when we see the results. We've made our party position very, very clear that we will work in areas where there is agreement, or where you need to be held accountable, and where it goes against our values, our principles. We will definitely raise those issues as well, because it is a question of accountability. So it is not just a straightforward going into a coalition, and there is got to be no horse trading as well, because at the end of the day, we are not here to jockey for position. We are here to do what is right and what we should be doing. And at the end of the day, we are still accountable to our electorate, to those that have, should we get a seat, and to those who have actually put us or placed us in power. We owe it to them because this is the premise and this is the promise that we had actually made to the voters. This is a commitment that we had made. So obviously, a lot of that will have to actually navigate or negate and negotiate around when it comes to coalitions.
Mm. And I think, of course, while we're on the topic of coalitions, Palestine has also been something that's been discussed quite prominently in the build-up to the elections. And I see quite beautifully so, both of you are wearing something that, represents that solidarity that your parties are speaking about when it comes to Palestine. Sister Ferouz, firstly for you and Al Jamaa, how big a factor is the Palestine issue when it comes to who you will work with and who you won't work with?
It's one of our central premises, because if you I started off with saying we enjoy what is good and we avoid what is harmful. The kind of oppression and that we see happening in Palestine, I mean, it's an outright genocide. Um, if we look at the recent initiatives that the IOF is trying to do in order to totally exterminate our Palestinian people, who can stand for that? So our view is if you try to sugarcoat what is really happening, if you deny the genocide that is actually happening, how can you find any common ground in that particular area? We find that there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation around how the IOF is actually placed internationally. And we're saying we must claim back the narrative. We've had ICJ rulings, we've had the United Nations General Assembly rule that, you know, the IOF is not a state, it is a belligerent occupier. So how can you leave the fate of an entire nation up to a belligerent occupier? We have to claim back the narrative. We find that a lot of our parties, the moonshot-backed parties, totally deny realities in international law and what we see factually on the ground. There can be no common ground as far as that's concerned.
Well, for me, Zaid, I've been in humanitarian journalism. I've been part and parcel of Salam Media for a long time. And I think my position and AM Force's position is very, very clear when it comes to Palestine. But it's not only about Palestine. I think wherever injustice occur, we hear South Africa has been applauded, and rightly so, for taking the matter up to the ICJ. But it is not only the South African government. It has been the will of the people on the ground, the solidarity movement as well. So this is not only about a government. The government are our but it's not only about Palestine. There are injustices, and as Muslims, we stand up to oppression, we stand up to injustices right across the entire world. There are injustices taking place in many places, whether we talk about India, we talk about Kashmir, we talk about Myanmar, we talk about what has taken place in Iraq, where over 1 million children, 1 million babies that were killed. Right? We talk about what is happening in China, Xinjiang. These are some of our partners in BRICS as well. Right? We've seen with regard to Palestine in particular, South Africans that are serving in the IDF, and for 15 years, the NPA has been sitting with those dockets. None of them have been prosecuted. These are the questions that we should be asking. These are the questions, if you are in parliament, these are the questions you need to be raising with the Minister of Justice. It's only in recent times where we hear about these IDF soldiers, right? But this has been going on for 15 years, and this is where the disappointment is. I raised the issue about visas. Since democracy, Israelis as citizens were allowed into South Africa visa-free. Why only in the last 2 years the issue of Palestine was actually addressed? Now, what I'm saying is these are questions and these are issues that we feel very, very strongly about. So Palestine is a major issue, and parties that do support this illegitimate, the Zionist entity is a no-no as far as we are concerned. And these are principles that we will hold on to, and these are principles that we feel very, very strongly about.
I think the sense I'm getting from both of you is that the Palestine issue really has taken center stage, and it will continue to take center stage as coalition negotiations progress in the coming weeks. But when we look at the results as they've come through, many were saying that the Democratic Alliance might not do as well as it would have done if it took a stance against Israel. And people were saying, well, you boycott the DA because it has, in their opinion, sided with Zionist Israel. But then again, you have the ANC on the other hand, which people are fed up with and are frustrated with the lack of service delivery over the years, with the way that the country is going and the way that they've been running things. But if this really was a big issue for South African voters, how then? And I think this is the question we've been mulling over for the past 24 hours, just as the results are coming through. How on earth is it that parties like the Democratic Alliance were able to report gains in this election? How is it that the ANC, despite its stated support for Palestine, still declined to the extent that it is? In fact, we're looking at a worst case scenario that was predicted in the build up to these elections, with the ANC just hovering around 41%. And then, of course, why did this not translate into votes for parties like yourselves? Mr. Tefedus?
Look, as I've said, we've actually, the ANC has shed votes. I think if you look retrospectively at the number of votes compared to what they've had in previous years, there has been a shedding of votes. And I think a lot of those votes has come to parties. I mean, if we had grown and parties had shed, our conclusion is some of those votes must have been captured by Al Jamaa and other similar parties which have grown. Um, if you retrospectively compare in the other elections, and we've seen that across the board, various other smaller parties have actually increased in number. Um, One issue that we have been made alive to this evening is that one of our voters actually contacted us with concern at their voting station that they, now this is one vote given, understand that, but this person voted national, Al Jamaa national at a particular BB. And we see that that is not being reflected on the papers. There's actually a zero tally. So it could have happened to that one and how many others that was not captured on the ballots.
Has Al Jamaa taken that up with the IEC in
We
this
have, we
instance?
have. We're currently busy with getting an affidavit from two people that has raised the same concern. We've also spoken to the IEC this evening to alert them to the fact, and they pointed us to the Section 55 one complaints procedure, objection procedure in terms of the Electoral Act, which we are currently pursuing. We've also spoken to some of the media outlets who said, well, they can't just take it up because they haven't spoken to the IEC. Fair enough, we understand that. But we feel that there's a certain nonchalance when issues like this are being raised. From we were here with every press briefing, sorry, we've had people raising concerns around whether it's free, whether it's fair, being turned away, all of those things. So we'd like issues like this to be taken equally seriously. I mean, what what could have happened if this had taken place in other voting stations with other votes as well? You scheme off the top and you place it where? Where did that vote go to if it's not being reflected as an Al Jamaa vote or any party for that matter? Triple C had the same issue. So is it possible that you could have a skimming of votes placed in certain areas where there's smoke, there's fire? We'd like this to be seriously considered and looked into. I mean, we understand that this might not go anywhere, but I think it's serious questions about our democracy. It's a serious concern around
Hmm.
that.
Well, I think we've
Sorry,
had a similar experience as well. In fact, yesterday when I got to the results center, I met up with someone. He says, I've just checked the results of my ward where I voted, and I know my wife and I voted for AM4C, but it doesn't reflect a single vote on the results sheet. And just today, again, on the group, I saw a video clip on our AM4C video clip group where an additional zero was being added onto a result sheet as well. So it's a matter that we are also taking up. We have lodged a complaint. And I think the dilemma that the smaller parties find ourselves in is you cannot be represented at each and every polling station. Lack of resources, lack of manpower, and checks and balances. You rely on the IEC. You rely on them to do the right thing, and I think this is where the problem actually comes in. And as Sister Feroz has mentioned, that how many more polling stations could this actually have happened to? And clearly, there are question marks that we can raise with regards to the integrity of the elections being uh, free and fair. And even it one vote that has been tampered with, is a vote too much, and one wouldn't expect that. I mean, we've seen it right across some of the other countries. We just came out of the election from Pakistan, and we've seen what a massive issue that had become in terms of vote rigging. You know, and again, just coming to the whole question about Palestine is just one other issue. Remember, Palestine is not only been an issue here in South Africa; it's going to be an issue in the US elections. We know it is. It's an issue in the UK elections as well. So Palestine is big. It's actually going to change the way we see the world. And again, we've seen it play here in South Africa. To what extent this is going to actually play out for, in favor, or against the ANC? We know the Dr. Naledi Pandor was used extensively throughout this campaign in all the Muslim areas. She's been, and our leader made this point. He says Dr. Pandor hasn't eaten more curry and rice in the last 2 months than what she has in the last 30 years. But, is it going to bear a fruit for them? But that's an ANC problem. It's not a problem for us. But again, like I said, that's just been one issue. But for me, I think the Muslim voter, to a large extent, has been focused only on Palestine, and they have forgotten many, many of the other issues that are actually playing out. Remember, we've got a government to run for the next 5 years. Palestine may come, may go. It will, the issue will at some point in time come to an end, but we still have got a country. We still have got young people growing up in this country. We still need to leave a legacy for future generations, right?
And I think we'll leave it at that on that note. And shukran so much to both of you for your time this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure discussing the Muslim vote. I'm sure many people wondering what happened to that Muslim vote, and hopefully they've got some answers after this tonight.
Shukran for that, right? Wonderful being with you.
All right, we'll leave it at that. We were just discussing the Muslim vote in South Africa, and of course, the Palestine issue was one of the most prominent ones, as we also discussed coalition politics. Stay tuned. We will be bringing you more action as and when it happens here at the Results Center.